series. It kind of is a full circle moment for me, as Brendan did say. I graduated from the Bachelor of Science in PE with Geography in 2022. And then fairly soon after, in May 2023, I actually started my PhD at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, and Coventry University in the UK. So it's called a co-to-tell program, where I'm kind of getting a double degree at the same time. But Deakin is my host institution, so I've spent the best part of the last 2 years at Deakin University, and now I'm on my COV visit, so I'm back and forth from Ireland. And as Brendan said, I have 2 months and 2 days exactly until I submit my thesis. Anyone that's familiar with the Australian way of doing things, you have really hard deadlines, which is tough, but it's also a good thing. So yeah, that has all inspired my guest talk today, which is entitled "Who Gets to Belong in Strength Education?" So I wanted to start with a quote from this amazing lady, Malala Yousafzai, who said, "We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back." And here she is talking to the gender inequalities in education. So for my PhD, I've kind of been looking at, what does this mean for PE? What does it mean for strength training? And what does it mean for girls whose experiences are not fully recognized within dominant norms of participation? And this really closely links to the UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals 4 and 5 of quality education and also gender equality. So as most of you probably know, PE isn't a neutral space, rather it's a culturally constituted one where some forms of movement, embodiment and identity are more readily legitimized than others. So traditionally, Western PE has privileged competitive sport, masculine participation norms, visible bodies, athletic bodies, and also heteronormative assumptions about gender and embodiment. And while Muslim adolescent girls are a really underexplored and under-researched population, there is a body of qualitative literature that does tell us that Muslim girls' experiences of PE are shaped less by Islam alone and more around how PE is organized. So around dominant norms of dress and body visibility, how it's organized around mixed gender participation, how it tends to prefer competitive, public, and performance-oriented participation norms. So this kind of mirrors the disability research a lot, where we kind of see the barriers in the environment rather than with the individuals themselves. So we're really trying to turn away from that deficit-based framing to a more strengths-based approach. So then one of the key questions underpinning my PhD is, how can strength training be positioned within PE as a legitimate, meaningful and inclusive practice for adolescent girls whose experience sit outside these dominant norms? And the vehicle that we used to investigate this question was the Resistance Training for Teens program. So it provided the empirical case through which this question was interrogated or explored. So you might ask yourself, why strength training? Why did we go for strength training? Well, it expands PE beyond traditional sport, which sometimes does preference these masculine participation norms and that competitive nature. My whole PhD is very strongly rooted in physical literacy as well. That's definitely a strong underpinning, and resistance training or strength training is a lifelong physical activity. So we're hoping that what girls engage with in schools is hopefully something that they'll bring on to later life. Also, we have analytic evidence which tells us that resistance training is favoured by those who have lower levels of physical fitness, poor exercise adherence, or reduced tolerance for aerobic training. And this is final point is kind of more of a hypothesis, but we thought that it might be more compatible with modesty and privacy considerations for Muslim girls than traditional sport or games-based approaches to physical education. And then why resistance training for teens? So resistance training for teens is basically an evidence-based school program. So it kind of runs for one whole school term, and it has practical components in the PE class, but in PE in Australia, it's organized different. It's actually called health and physical education. So you actually have one health class per week as well. So while you're developing your fundamental skills in resistance training, skill competency, you're also developing knowledge for why you're doing that kind of activity, and also the different benefits and things like that. So we decided to go for this program because my PhD was completely done in the Australian context. It is an evidence-based school program that has been seen to work. So in the original randomized control trial back in 2015, it improved students' muscular fitness and resistance training self-efficacy, which is like your confidence for resistance training, and also your skill competency. So were you better at doing your squats? Were you better at doing your overhead press? Were you better at doing your lunges? Then it was subsequently in 2018 successfully scaled off across the state of New South Wales. So New South Wales is Australia's most populous state. It's the state that Sydney's in. So 10,000 students are estimated to have taken part in this dissemination trial. But one of the key points here is that 94% of coeducational of the schools that participated in this dissemination trial were coeducational government schools. Since then, it's gone on for a hybrid type 3 implementation effectiveness trial in 2023. And I know that paper is still trying to be published at the moment. So this kind of shows that resistance training for teens has been really successfully scaled up, but what about scaling it out? What about scaling it out for new populations, priority populations, and different contexts? So then resistance training for teens offered a concrete case for examining what happens when an evidence-based program, so a program that's shown to work, travels into a new educational and a new sociocultural context. So why could resistance training not just be transplanted from the co-educational government schools to a different sort of school? So resistance training for teens evidence, as I said, came largely from the co-ed government schools in Australia. However, this doesn't represent the full suite of contexts in which Australian students are educated. There are three main school sectors in Australia, which are government, we have Catholic schools, and there's also independent schools. So these independent schools include other faith-based schools and also the private sector, which is in Australia absolutely huge. If you're familiar with the UK system, it kind of mirrors that. We wanted to look at independent Islamic schools in my PhD. So these operate in completely different gender, cultural, and institutional norms. The way the ethos of the school is set up is completely different to that of the non-denominational co-ed government school. So the issue here isn't just about implementing something that was done before. We need to contextually translate what was evidence-based before and see does it fit into the new context. So in order to do this, I used something called the ecological validity model, which has 8 different culturally centering components, which are language, concepts, persons, goals, metaphors, methods, content, and context. So it helps to identify where contextual adjustment is needed and where we can actually retain the core evidence-based components of the original program. And I'll explain a little bit more about this in the next slide. So yeah, what did we do then? The very first study of my PhD was actually an adaptation study. So the aim of the study was to examine what needed to shift for strength training delivered through resistance training for teens to become culturally responsive and educationally meaningful for Muslim adolescent girls. So we weren't just looking at what exactly needs to change in the program so that Muslim girls will like it, but we actually wanted to interrogate, is strength training for them? Can they see themselves represented in this sort of physical activity? Does it resonate with them? This was an iterative qualitative study guided by the ecological validity model dimensions. So for example, when I was conducting, we had loads of different types of methods here, but when I was conducting interviews, for example, all of my questions would have been framed around different aspects of the ecological validity model. So for example, in terms of the goals, I would have asked them, okay, the goals of resistance training for teens are to improve muscular fitness and for students to gain the skills, the knowledge, the confidence and motivation to engage with resistance training for the life course. Is this something that resonates with you? So that's kind of how we framed all of our questions. So using all of these different things, that's how we interrogated the program, basically. there was 3 different participant groups. I had 18 Muslim adolescent girls, which were involved in a series of co-design workshops. I had 7 female health and physical education teachers working in Islamic schools, and they took part in focus groups. And then I had 5 Muslim community leaders who took part in individual interviews. Of the 7 female HPE teachers, 5 were actually Muslim themselves, and the other 2 had at least 5 years experience teaching in the Islamic schools, so they were really embedded in that context. And I analysed this through reflexive thematic analysis. So you might see me. I'm from Carrick-on-Shore, County Tipperary/Waterford. I'm not Muslim. I went to all-girls Catholic school, so what am I doing researching this Muslim population? We had to ask, with my supervisory team, we really interrogated this and asked ourselves questions and how could we be more culturally responsive? So while I was engaging with the literature, I found Dr. Niamh. I was actually reading her thesis. She did a similar study where she wanted to look at lifestyle interventions for Middle Eastern adolescents, boys and girls. And I actually reached out to her in the first place to ask for her thesis, because her thesis, there was an embargo on it or something. And I just reached out to her and we kind of had a conversation, and then that kind of snowballed into, actually, would you like to be a part of this project? Would you like to help me recruit the Muslim community leaders and help me to interpret everything that's said in interviews and just make sure that I'm being like religiously and culturally responsive at all points? So Niamh really held my hand. She lives in Sydney. We spoke a lot on Zoom. So at every stage of my like data collection, when I was making my scripts, just to make sure that I didn't say anything quote unquote wrong, I was being just responsive to the religion and also the specific culture. So she was amazing. And without getting too bogged down in the methods, this was actually like a massive study. So huge kudos to anyone that does co-design research, because it's just not like, it's not simple, and you have to do multiple rounds of data analysis and look at things in different ways. So yeah, basically this was a very iterative process where we returned to the different groups several times. I had loads of different meetings with one of the original developers of the Resistance Training for Teens program to make sure that I wasn't going too far from what the program wanted to represent in the first place. Lots of meetings with Niamh to make sure that I was being religiously and culturally responsive, and then with the rest of the team. So yeah, it was a really iterative process with multiple rounds of analyses, but it was really worthwhile in the end, I think so anyway. So some of the key findings of this study was that strength training was actually reframed as legitimate, relevant, and faith compatible. So firstly, we found it was faith aligned. So participants linked strength training with the Islamic values of caring for one's body and mind. They actually kind of saw resistance training as recognizably there. So by putting in representation, modesty sensitive materials, and female only provision of the program, it helped the girls see the program as appropriate and relevant. And also it was seen to be legitimate in the context. So in the Islamic school context, through timetable, health and physical education, as long as the teaching was supportive, respectful, and culturally congruent. So that made the participants feel safe and also like they belong to the program. So one of the key results was it was not simply improved access, but a shift in meaning. Strength became something Muslim girls could see as for them, rather than something they had to negotiate access to. So just to go a little bit deeper here, I decided to retain some of the quotes from the participant voice, because I think it's quite nice to actually hear what they said. So this was from one of my students who said, participating in resistance training is a great reminder to stay fit, and it aligns with Islamic values to take care of our health and our bodies. So what mattered was strength was linked to caring for the body and mind, knowledge and self-betterment resonated with participant values, and strength training was framed as compatible with faith rather than intention to it, because stereotypically a lot of the time people just think, okay, Islam is so prohibitive and girls can't participate in physical activity because of their Islamic values and principles. That I found that wasn't the case at all. So this is another one which really links to empowerment. So this was from another student. I feel like it's very important for me, as well as other Muslim girls, to engage in this type of physical activity, because we're usually looked down upon. while doing physical activity. So we should do our best to prove them wrong. So it shows that strength training was interpreted as a way of resisting limiting assumptions about Muslim girls' participation in sport and physical activity. So that was really kind of a result about empowerment. And as I mentioned before, there is this kind of misconception about the religion, and this actually really came through. So what we kind of found through our interviews is that what is prohibitive of physical activity participation isn't actually faith, but it's actually the cultural beliefs and the cultural values that exist within those communities. So this is a really telling quote from one of my Muslim community leaders. Islam does encourage physical activity and health among people. However, where there's probably a disconnect is the cultural thinking, the cultural beliefs that people have in being female, being out in the open, sports, physical activity, especially around men or where males are present, it's seen as taboo. I think there's a distinction there that needs that people need to understand about religion encouraging physical activity and that the culture having a taboo. So we see that culture and religion are a little bit in tension there. So Islam is described as supportive of health. Greater restriction was located in the cultural expectations, the gender norms, and everyday social practices. This distinction matters because it avoids misrepresenting faith itself as the barrier. So moving on from that theme, there's another really strong theme about representation. So participants really valued seeing themselves reflected in the program content. And before I started, this was something that I kind of thought, okay, yeah, that's going to be one of the results. I didn't want to presume, but this is something that I thought might occur from this study. So this is a quote from a student: seeing the girls in the hijab motivates other girls to be active and feel confident in their hijab. So that's kind of linking back to that empowerment point again, which was really nice. So visual representation signaled the program was intended for girls like them. Girls could imagine themselves participating without compromising their religious identity, and representation supported confidence, legitimacy, and belonging. And as one of the Muslim community leaders put it so aptly, if you can see it, you can believe it, right? So she's referring to seeing themselves represented in the program content, so the girls believe that it's for them. So inclusion was not just about access, but it depended whether the program felt visible, related, and for us. Another really interesting point that I found is that the program pedagogy aligned with the Islamic educational traditions. So the delivery of the resistance training for teens program and a lot of the programs that are come out of the University of Newcastle is the safe teaching principles. So this emphasizes that pedagogy should be supportive, active, autonomous, fair, and enjoyable. So I actually found that there was alignment between Islamic ways of knowing, being, and doing and the actual pedagogy that exists within the program already. So as the Muslim community leader said, we have a very strong oral transmission and a strong transmission of chain. When you were learning things, we followed the I do, we do, you do example. It's called talaqi in the culture. It has connotations with the Islamic faith, whether you're transmitting the Holy Quran or even in sports. I'll do an exercise and then we'll do it together, and then I'll ask you to do it all. I should never ask you to do it without me doing it first. So it was a relational modeled way of learning. I do, we do, you do. So why it mattered, it kind of linked with RT for teens closely through the teacher modeling, the guidance practice, and also the gradual release of responsibility from a more teacher-led approach to a student-led approach as competence and confidence improves in resistance training over the course of the program. So the program really resonated because it was built in familiar ways of learning. And living in Australia now for the last 3 years, this is a really salient point because there's a huge emphasis on Indigenous knowledge, so the Aboriginal Australians, and honouring Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing in everyday Australian culture. So this was something that was a complete surprise to me that it actually came up and that alignment came through so strongly. But it was really nice to see just being situated in the Islamic context. And it's also like a good lesson of we don't always have to reinvent the wheels with things. We should honor these ancient funds of knowledge that have existed for thousands of years and make that explicit in our program design. So when I'm delivering the program, workshop to the teachers. I'm kind of connecting this back to the Islamic ways of knowing, being, and doing, and then they can translate that to their students, and that might be something that connects to those Muslim girls more. So some of the changes, I think we had like 70 changes or something like that, but we have a new name, logo, goals. They're modified. So as you can see, this is a hijabi lady, and it's now called Resistance Training for Teens Stronger. The stronger is a play on words, obviously, and that emphasizing the strength for girls was really, really important. So the program goals as well, we kept the original program goals, so that emphasis on muscular fitness and also building the confidence, knowledge, and motivation for engaging in resistance training. But we put a greater emphasis on that kind of holism of mind, body, and soul, because that's something that really aligns with the Islamic values and would resonate with the girls a lot more. Here are my new task cards, which were done by a great graphic designer. I think there's 300 task cards or something in the Resistance Training for Teens program. So we had, obviously you see a lot of representation here, but because of the talaqui, or the way that the Islamic way of doing things, we definitely place a greater emphasis on task cards being supplementary, with the instruction remaining primarily teacher-led in the beginning at least, and then going to the task cards then as supplementary. There was a lot of debate within the teachers and the Muslim community leaders, and some of the girls actually, in terms of how they wanted to see themselves represented. Everybody wanted modest dress, so as you can see, like a longer top and completely covered, but there was huge debate about whether all of the girls should depict an Islamic ideal of a hijabi lady, or whether we should actually represent the broad spectrum of religiosity that exists within the Islamic community. And obviously someone coming from a Western context thinks, oh yeah, obviously you want to be as diverse as possible, but I had to reflect actually the opinions of these Muslim community leaders and these teachers, that like that's their lived experience. So what I actually did in the end to kind of put an end to this argument is I had a vote with the students, and they could vote whether they wanted to have everybody in a hijab or whether they wanted some girls with their hair out, and they ultimately voted for that. And that's kind of just returning the decision to those that are most affected. So the program participants are the ones most affected. So I really wanted to align with their preferences the most. Then there was just like other things like seeing themselves. There's a theory lesson about social media and e-health technologies actually, and critiquing fitness apps. So we included different fitness apps, all the ones that were there, like Sweat with Kayla and those ones, but we also included just some representation in there as well. And this is Lena Deeb. She is a Muslim fitness influencer who's actually quite popular. Religious considerations, which are mad, that I had never, ever even thought of, was that music is banned in Islamic colleges. They can't listen to instrumental music. So all of the, which is really has huge implications for their music curriculum, which is mandated to deliver when you can't listen to instrumental music, but that's another whole topic. So there was certain challenges that are to music, so like squat jumping and push-ups and things like that. I removed any of those and replaced them with like different activities such as advocacy rats and rabbits. This was something that was suggested by one of the Muslim community leaders who is a soccer coach. And it's, instead of regular rats and rabbits, which I'm sure we're all aware of, this is rather needs and wants. So you'd say something like access to modesty-friendly sports uniforms. They'd run to whatever side, and it would actually facilitate a little bit of a debate. And then Elite 11 tracksuit bottoms, probably not familiar, sorry, the teacher holds up this prompt basically, and they run to either side. But Elite 11 tracksuit bottoms, I don't know, is Elite 11 a thing here? Is it a thing here? It's like, it's the cool brand in Australia. It's what everybody wants to wear. So yeah, just facilitating those kind of needs and wants discussion, bringing in that kind of bit of social justice education. And also to make that a bit more resistance training focused, we'd have them hold like a front support, or have them hold a squat and stuff before they engage with this activity. And then these are like energizer breaks that are trickled into the theory lessons. Snakes and lizards are like haram. They're seen as like poisonous. So I remember showing these materials to Muslim community and they're like, oh my God, you cannot show that. I was like, why? So it was just interesting that we had to edit out some of the things, and even dogs are haram as well. So there was a pet would you rather session for energizer break for the theory lesson, and I think we ended up just getting rid of that completely. Yeah, so they're just some of the considerations. Cultural considerations then as well. As we said, the culture is quite prohibitive and restrictive around Muslim adolescent girls being out in the open, exercising, especially in public forums. So there was a homework activity where they wanted the girls to kind of use the skill set they're after developing and develop their own resistance training plan that they could do in like one of these parks. But this wasn't really suitable for the girls. So instead, we just changed it up and we made it an at-home plan that they could just do at home with their household, I was going to say ingredients, things that they have in their house. And also that's going to benefit them a lot more, because we were literally told by the teachers, it was like girls will not be allowed to exercise out in public forums like that. Okay, so that was basically some of the adaptations that were made and how strength was repositioned for girls. And then basically we wanted to see in a feasibility study, what were the impacts of this, or basically we wanted to trial it out to see, does it actually work in a real world context? Does it work in Islamic schools? So the aim of this study was to examine the feasibility, acceptability, and preliminary efficacy of resistance training for teens when delivered as a teacher-led strength training program in Islamic secondary school settings. It was a mixed method study. It was a controlled pilot with a waitlist control design. So we had two classes, one class in my intervention school and one class in my control school. Basically in term 3, which was like July to October 2025, the intervention school did the resistance training for teens program, and the control school just continued with their regular PE. And they were both in Victoria, Australia. We had Muslim adolescent girls, 56 Muslim adolescent girls in years 9 and 10. So that's equivalent to third year and transition year in Ireland. So they were a mean age of 14.81 years. So the teacher-led delivery within timetable HPE over one school term. So the teachers kept fidelity logs. So anything that they would deliver a lesson, and then I encouraged them that after the lesson, and they're really good at this, after the lesson that they would write down any changes that they made to the lesson, so I could see, was it actually delivered how it was intended to be delivered. They did a program evaluation at the end of the program in terms of, was it feasible, was it acceptable, things like that, was it sustainable? And then we also collected some qualitative post-program feedback. We did a student program evaluation as well, just to see, was it sustainable, feasible, etc. We got some qualitative feedback from them as well about, likes, dislikes, what else should change. And we did some pre and post outcome measures. So I'm not going to harp on about this too much, but through my PhD, I developed a measure, and with two co-authors in the room, Mark and Brendan. So we developed a measure of resistance training knowledge in adolescents. So it was actually a good opportunity to be able to use this tool, as my PhD is underlined by physical literacy. So we wanted to look at knowledge of resistance training, confidence of resistance training, and motivation for resistance training, and whether or not resistance training for teens stronger had an impact on this. So was the program feasible to deliver in real world conditions? Was it acceptable to the students and teachers? Was it compatible with existing school cultures, ethos, and curriculum delivery? And did it change knowledge of confidence for and motivation for resistance training? So some of the key findings is resistance training for teens stronger could be delivered in ways that were feasible, acceptable, and educationally beneficial for Muslim girls. So all of the sessions were delivered with good fidelity. Most of the changes actually happened because some of the theory lessons were actually a little bit too long. So she often shifted lesson content from one to the other, but delivered most of the materials definitely. In terms of the comfort and like how it fit into the school's ethos and culture, one student said the program did feel comfortable because I was with people who I was comfortable with. So that meaning it was a female only facilitation, no boys are allowed in the PE hall when PE is going on. And yeah, so it was seen to fit in that context. One of the really nice findings I thought was it was seen to be engaging for all students. So the teacher said even the typical non-sporty students surprised me with their enthusiasm and participation. So there was a lot of quotes like this and a lot of quotes from the students saying that they really actually enjoyed learning about resistance training and doing the program. And also that they really enjoyed the task cards in terms of how the task cards work is that there's 4 levels to each movement. So going from more basic to obviously a little bit more complex. So they had the autonomy to decide, okay, how they're feeling today. Would they be able to do a chair squat, or would they be able to do a body weight squat, or perhaps they'd actually be able to do it with a little bit of weight. They really expressed that liking that challenge by choice. We also found that there was some further adaptation required, which in this kind of cultural adaptation research place that I am in, you always have to pilot the intervention to see what further changes have to be made. So lots of the students were not comfortable, even in the female environment, with certain exercises. So the squat, for example, they really didn't like the cue, stick out your bums. So this was just not something that was alienated them a little bit. Another thing was that the students felt uncomfortable doing like hip hinge exercises, so like hip thrusts and stuff on the ground. So in a further program iteration, we would basically make sure that there's kind of line of sight recommendations about certain activities. So this is more about classroom management. So when students are engaging in particular squats or hip hinging exercises or RDLs, for example, that they'd actually be kept out of the line of sight of other girls. Also, the hijab was a problem with the exercise, the barbell. So basically they wanted extra advice embedded into the program materials about how to actually get the barbell on, how to not expose your hair, things like that. So really kind of micro changes that are super specific. We did have some early educational promise. So although it wasn't a fully powered trial, we did actually detect a significant group by time effect for resistance training knowledge and confidence in favor of the intervention group, suggesting that strength education was both inclusive and educationally meaningful. There was no significant change in motivation, which is something that is kind of expected, because if anybody's familiar with the literature in health promotion and motivation for exercise or healthy behaviors or whatever, motivation is often the hardest thing to change. So inclusion was not just designed into the program, it had to be enacted in practice. So yeah, kind of key takeaways beyond this one very specific case, because I realize it is quite specific. So it's not just about resistance training for teens or resistance training for Teens Stronger. It speaks to how PE and sport pedagogy think about inclusion. So the question shifts from, can girls access this, or can X priority group access this, to, was this built with their realities in mind? So it challenges that one size fits all assumptions in evidence-based program design, which does pose problems for implementation science as well. So there's a give and take. In terms of the broader contribution, it's a way of thinking about equitable intervention work, not as simple scaling, but as thoughtful translation across contexts, identities, and institutional realities. This is relevant well beyond one setting, one program, or one population. So I know this is a little bit not concrete and a little bit maybe ambiguous, but through my PhD discussion, I have managed to pull together a decision framework, which hopefully will be able to be used in research. It's a decision framework which guides researchers, school practitioners, school leadership, or teachers true adaptation, the depth of which adaptation is required, and whether or not it's needed and how they should actually do that. But I haven't that fully finalized yet, so I didn't want to share it today. But if anybody is particularly interested in this area of research, I definitely love to have a conversation afterwards and maybe show you what I have developed thus far. Yeah, so this really does connect back with the UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals in terms of providing quality education. So school-based strength training can be meaningful learning, and it can actually have good outcomes for knowledge. Also, pedagogy matters, not just provision. So how the teachers engage with the students was just as important and as actually what the content was. In terms of gender equality, girls shouldn't be peripheral to program design, particularly in priority populations such as Muslim adolescent girls, where the dominant approaches fail to reflect their needs, identities, and realities. So equity involves recognition as well as access, and also good health and well-being. So supports stronger, more confident movement participation. Health promotion efforts must be contextually usable, and also it promoted knowledge around physical activity. So to come back to my opening slide, who gets to belong in strength education? Well, I would say everyone, if strength is presented in ways that recognize people, represent them, and make them feel like participation is possible. So in this project, strength became something Muslim girls could see as for them, not something they had to negotiate access to. And just as a final note, I think in inclusive physical education or sports coaching, for example, it's not just about opening the door, but it's also about making sure that students can see that they belong on the other side of that door. I thought that was a really nice way to sum up. I must give a big thank you to everyone listening to me here today. Happy to take any questions that you might have. There is my email. If you ever want to send me an email about anything, I'll be super responsive on there. I can't finish without giving huge kudos to my supervisory team of Lisa Barnett, Mike Duncan, Dave Lubens, Emiliano Mazzoli, and Trent Brown. Their support through this research has been second to none, and they're an absolutely amazing supervisory team, and I count myself very lucky. Yeah, so that's kind of me, and there are my references, but don't hurt your eyes. Yeah, so happy to take any questions or comments or anything.
Great stuff.